Since Monday morning, my mind has gone through various memories, snatches of lyrics, pieces of music almost at hyper speed, a rapid-fire review of a life spent in the presence of David Bowie, Ziggy, Funk to Funky, The Return of the Thin White Duke, Sound and Vision, Queen Bitch, La Hunger, Piero the Clown falls wanking to the floor. A whistle-stop tour where you don't really get to decide what you remember most fondly, at least not yet because your soul is too busy grieving, not sure whether it wants to get some happy jollies from Jean Genie or tearfully wail rock and roll suicide into a half-empty bottle of wine. It is hard to conceive of a world now where David Bowie is in the past because he was always there. More than that, he was just about always at the forefront, years ahead of anyone else. Bowie was never in that comfortable middle ground of legend where folks like Sir Paul and Bob Dylan reside. The choice was to either be at the very bleeding edge of the zeitgeist or to be, as he was until recently, virtually not famous at all. Only the chameleon could be so incognito. He is one of the very few people for me who could be called legends in music who never, at any point, was not in total control of his image and work. And as we painfully learned on Monday, that extended to his death. He released his final album on his birthday last Friday, disappeared into the wardrobe in his final video, and then disappeared altogether, flying away from the world into somewhere that he knew wasn't going to be boring. It was almost as if he could have gone at any time, whenever he wanted, whenever he thought that his work here was done, without leaving anything unsaid, except the admission that he was ill. To do that would make his people realise that in the end he was human. I'm not a spiritual person, I don't believe in God, but I do believe in David Bowie. It is hard to now see Bowie as the dead legend, the entity described in LCD Soundsystem's Someone Great, where the person left behind tries to go through all their memories of a deceased loved one, the fights, the breakups and makeups, only to be left with exactly what's there in the title. All we can do now is look back, and everyone is now choosing what to look back on in order to make their own personal tribute to the man. Everyone just reactively flocks to something anyway. A lot of people have fond memories, even fonder now, of Labyrinth, the 1986 Jim Henson fantasy film where Bowie, in arguably his most famous film role, starred as Jareth the Goblin King. For myself, as my own personal tribute, my own excuse to talk about Bowie and what he meant to me, I choose a couple of licensed games based off that movie. The first of them was released in the same year by Lucasfilm for various computer formats, and for a licensed game it is actually sort of important, if not necessarily the greatest thing. I mean, for Bowie it is naught but a drop in the ocean, a bit-part role in just one of those so many plays, but it's something to hold on to, something long forgotten through which we can still look into a world where David Bowie isn't dead. And it's a whole lot better than bloody Omicron. Labyrinth as a film even before Monday was an odd one. Certainly a slow burner, one that has, somewhat sadly, always been magnified and revived through death. On its original release in 1986 it was largely panned critically and disappointed at the box office, just another lame fantasy film soon to be forgotten in the eyes of the people. Its first major critical re-evaluation occurred in 1990 when its creator, Jim Henson, the man behind the Muppets and a legend in his own right, passed on. This was his only solo feature film, and when Jim died it was reappraised as people looked back on it and found a quite fun, campy piece of fantasy with David Bowie as a Goblin King that fit in very nicely within Henson's oeuvre. People regretted that the negative reception Labyrinth received largely persuaded Jim to not fully bother with feature films again, something that could have easily changed, if not for his sudden death. In the wake of Bowie's death, this process will happen again as Labyrinth becomes one of the foremost memories of an icon. An image that was once tipped to be forgotten within a year will now endure forever. One upshot of all of this is that the computer game, virtually forgotten now, was a bit more successful than the movie was in the States, believe it or not. We're going to be seeing the C64 version here. Labyrinth is important because after a text adventure opening, it turns into a graphic adventure. It does largely follow the events of the film, but that's the main thing about it game-wise. It was hardly the first ever graphic adventure of course, but it's notable as the first one to be made by Lucasfilm Games. Jesus, you could almost actually equate this with his first self-titled album, couldn't you? Not long after this, lead designer David Fox would work on the team behind the studio's Maniac Mansion, and Fox's own contribution to Lucasfilm's, or later LucasArts' incredible One of Adventures, would be 1988's Zack McCracken and the Alien Mindbenders. No less a figure than Douglas Adams was involved with this game early on, brainstorming ideas with the team on what to include. The debut album comparison is pretty apt actually. Just as Bowie's first record shows a certain amount of potential but is flawed and doesn't exactly hint at what's to come, Lucasfilm's first adventure is the same. Labyrinth is an okay game, but not without faults. Lots of them. It does have some nice touches here and there, not least amongst them an awesome drawing of Giroud himself, and it's clear that this isn't just your average rushed out licensed game. There's a non-linear structure for a lot of the game where certain things you choose, including your favourite colour at the start, can even change the path that you'll have to take through the game, which does at least make replays varied. And it does all look quite nice to boot if you're a fan of C64 graphics and the odd cool sound effect. The design though is, it's just a little too plain for me. Oddly, the atmospheric nature of the text adventure part at the start tends to set the scene for me a lot better than most of the graphics do. The Wall of Hands is a quite nice part though. Alas, the game does devolve a little into very straight mazes and the like, with the odd rather annoying puzzle here and there. They're not overly complex or anything, but they're certainly lacking a little when compared to other LucasArts games. One of the better things that the game does is the inclusion of a word wheel, which David Fox used to circumvent having to constantly type in text. This can speed things up a little, especially once you get used to queuing up commands, and it's obviously a forerunner of the systems that LucasArts would use in the games to come. Not perfect, but a nice prototype, and having to use both the keyboard and joystick is never really an issue here. As is the case a lot of the time though, bad things happen when the adventure game tries to do things it was never capable of doing. The Castle of the Goblinkin section, where you have to chuck rocks at passing goblin guards. Yeah, this whole thing is too tedious for me to get past. The goblins are fine, but the bullseyes and the chain can just sod off. It's too easy to just screw yourself over at times, as there are so many commands and it can get confusing when they're all open to you, every single possibility. There's good things in Labyrinth, and you can see a prototype of what's to come from LucasArts, but in the end that's what it is, really. Much like that first album. But there is something else. Something quite obscure. A Labyrinth game for the NES. Oh, what's that? You didn't know that there was a Labyrinth game for the NES? Well, there was. However, it never actually came out in the West for some reason. It was only released in Japan. However, decent translations are available. This is a wholly different game and is more of a dungeon crawler. It's quite a bit like Gauntlet actually. The premise is the same, of course. Jareth brings Sarah into his world and says that she has 13 hours to rescue her brother. The time in this game represents your energy. It goes down faster when you get hit, and just like in Gauntlet, it gradually goes down anyway over time. There are several levels of increasing complexity based on general layouts from the film, the castle, the hedge maze and so forth, with various characters dotted around the place. Usually you'll have to find something, often a piece of the labyrinth's key, in order to succeed and pass on to the next level. And you know what? This game is actually quite good. Very similar to Gauntlet, but I dig that, and therefore I dig this. It's bloody hard though, seriously. Enemies are everywhere. Even the generic flies that take one hit to kill crowd around you and hit you often. One useful ability though that you might not get immediately is being able to fire diagonally while walking in another direction, quite like a strafe, and that can come in very handy. You'll also want to explore levels for hearts. You give these to one of your free buddies and I assume, or at least think, that levels up your character. And every little does help in this game. It's a toughie and completing it will take you a while. But this is a very decent Famicom game, one that's worth seeking out, particularly if you've got a flashcart or just on emulation. There is enough important text here that I wouldn't consider playing it without a translation. Of the two Labyrinth games, this one's definitely the better for me. Still, it's odd. In one corner you have a fairly middling adventure that is mainly important purely based on the team that created it, and in the other a perfectly serviceable actiony crawler that for whatever reason never left Japan. Perhaps another odd thing about Labyrinth is that other countries besides the States took to it a lot better than the Americans themselves did. I suppose it wouldn't have mattered all that much to a citizen of the world like Bowie. His own major dalliance with games was obviously not here, that was to come of course. Omicron could have been relevant in that sense, but I guess I'd rather cover something that I enjoyed more. And hey, like I said, any excuse, really. You know, speaking just as someone who makes videos like the ones that I do, the process can be a little cathartic at times. You often end up profiling someone becomes the focus of a video, and in the end you have to say goodbye to them. Even if it's only recanting things that happened in real life, you still have to kill someone off. It was hard to kill off the Amiga, it was hard to kill off Raul Julia, hell it was even hard to kill Jack Tramiel. I spent 2 videos with that guy. But I spent a lifetime with Bowie. He was never not there. You wonder a lot of times in these moments if you've done justice to them, and if people will get it. I don't have too much to wonder here. I know that I could never even slightly do David Bowie justice, as I'm only human. But I guess a lot of people will get it, or will get that. This video by nature is more for me than it is for him, to generate that sort of catharsis, to ease a horrible and painful transition, to cure a hole in my heart, to actually say goodbye. And if it sounds almost as if I know the guy well, that's what his music was like. That's what his whole ethos was like. That's what he sang always. That you were with him, and you were you, no matter what. Many have sung songs along those lines, but Bowie might have been the only one who could make you truly believe that he meant it. And it's hard to say goodbye. I'm not ready yet. But as I've done many times in the past, if there's one thing that I could always get strength from, I think you know the rest. So much love, Starman, and thank you.